At my grandmother's funeral, my father turned to me and hissed, "You're not even her real granddaughter." Then he tried to cut me out of a $40 million inheritance. What he didn't know. The bloodline he worshipped didn't run through him. It ran through me. He wanted to erase me from the family. But I was the family. "You're not even her real granddaughter." The words landed harder than any slap. We were in my grandmother's study. Mahogany shelves lined with dusty leather-bound books, her portrait looming above the fireplace like a silent judge. The funeral had been only 3 days ago. I was still grieving. And yet my father, Gregory, had already moved on to war. His face twisted in rage, not grief. "Only blood relatives deserve the Blackwell fortune," he spat, as if my presence in that room was an insult to the air he breathed. I stared at him, heart pounding, brain scrambling to make sense of what he had just said. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gregory gave a bitter chuckle, turning to glare at the portrait above us. "Your mother's little secret isn't so secret anymore. Once the lawyer confirms you've got no Blackwell blood, you'll get nothing." His tone wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. A declaration of war disguised as cold detachment. "Do you promise to keep your word?" I asked quietly, clinging to composure. "That only blood relatives deserve the inheritance?" "Absolutely," he said without hesitation. "I'll make sure the Blackwell legacy stays with real heirs, not imposters." Imposter. That word sank its claws into my chest. My name is Ava Blackwell. I'm 27 years old, and until 2 minutes ago, I believed Gregory Blackwell was my biological father. I'd spent a lifetime navigating his impossible standards, his conditional love, his passive-aggressive disappointment. But this was something else. This wasn't emotional distance. This was erasure. I thought of my last conversation with my grandmother, Eleanor. She'd been frail but lucid. Her hand had trembled as she held mine and said, "Remember, Ava, a true Blackwell makes their own path." At the time I thought it was sentimental. A goodbye. Now I realized it had been a warning. Gregory kept pacing like a general surveying a battlefield. "You can attend the will reading if you must," he said, not looking at me. "But don't expect anything. I've already spoken with Morris about challenging any provision that includes you." Morris, our family's attorney and my father's oldest friend. That explained the sudden hush around the house, the closed doors when I walked in, the clipped conversations that ended when I entered a room. They'd all been preparing for this, while I was still mourning. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Gregory left the room with the casual arrogance of someone who believed he'd already won. I collapsed into my grandmother's chair, the walnut cool beneath my fingertips. I could still smell her lavender perfume in the fabric. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "We need to talk. Alone. Tonight." Whatever was coming next, I wasn't ready for it. But I also wasn't walking away. The cafe was quiet, almost too quiet. Mom sat in our usual corner, nursing a cold cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her perfect posture slouched, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. For the first time in my life she looked fragile. "I never wanted you to find out like that," she said as soon as I sat down. "So it's true." My voice cracked on the word. "Gregory isn't my father?" She nodded, lips trembling. "It's complicated, Ava. So much more than he makes it sound." For the next hour, my mother unspooled a history I never knew I was part of. Before she married Gregory, she had been in love with Ryan, Gregory's younger brother. They'd met at university, full of big dreams and even bigger plans. But then Ryan got a prestigious research offer in Seattle. They agreed he should go, promised to make long-distance work. Except it didn't. Gregory, always the observer, the one waiting quietly in the wings, took his chance when Ryan was away. He comforted her, supported her, and eventually, when heartbreak blurred the lines, there was one night of weakness. "By the time I realized I was pregnant," she whispered, "Ryan was already engaged. I thought I was doing what was best for all of us." Gregory proposed almost immediately. He offered security, a future, a name. And I? She looked down at her wedding band, twisting it slowly. I needed stability for my baby. My throat burned. So it was true. My whole life I had thought Gregory's coldness was about who I was. Too sensitive, too creative, not ruthless enough to be a true Blackwell. But the truth was colder than that. It was never about who I was. It was about who I wasn't. I always suspected he resented you, Mom said. But I didn't think he'd ever use it against you. Why now? I asked, barely keeping the anger from breaking through. Why use it now after all these years? Because of your grandmother's will, she replied. She told me she was leaving you something significant. Gregory's terrified it'll undermine his control. I closed my eyes, the irony bitter on my tongue. The man trying to disqualify me from the Blackwell inheritance wasn't even a Blackwell himself, at least not by blood. But if I'm Ryan's daughter, I started. You are a Blackwell by blood, she said. Just not Gregory's. And Eleanor. She knew. I think she always knew. I stared at my mother, trying to process it all. The history. The lies. The reasons behind the shadows I'd grown up in. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely audible. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. That depends on what you want, Ava. Justice? Truth? Or just peace? I didn't know yet. But I knew one thing for sure. Gregory Blackwell wasn't going to erase me from this family. Not without a fight. I sat in the passenger seat of my car, engine still running, parked outside Ryan Blackwell's apartment. The last time I'd seen him I was 16. He'd brought me a compass necklace from Turkey, smiled like he'd never truly left, and then disappeared again for another 2 years. He was the cool uncle, the mysterious scientist who lived in distant cities and never stayed long, but when he did, he saw me, heard me, and now he might be my father. He opened the door before I knocked twice. He looked older, of course, gray at the temples, but the same thoughtful eyes. Eyes that suddenly looked too familiar. Ava, he said, surprised but warm. Is everything all right? Can we talk? I asked. It's about Eleanor. And more. He stepped aside. Of course. His apartment was modest. Books and journals stacked beside framed certificates and family photos. On the wall was a picture of Eleanor in her 30s, smiling with the same tilt of the head I had when I laughed. I wondered if he saw it too. He set down 2 mugs of tea. What's going on? He asked. I didn't know how to say it delicately, so I didn't. Gregory told me I'm not his biological daughter. His face went still. He said I'm not a real Blackwell. He's trying to use it to cut me out of the will. Ryan's hands curled around his cup. That sounds like him. My mother told me. I hesitated. She told me you and she were together. Before she married Gregory. That the timeline fits. His eyes didn't widen. He didn't deny it. He just nodded slowly. We were. I never knew she was pregnant. I took a shaky breath. Would you be willing to take a DNA test? Just to know the truth. He didn't even pause. Yes. If you're my daughter, I want to know. I've always felt something. And if you're not, then at least we'll both have answers. That afternoon we went to a private clinic and submitted our samples. The technician promised results in 72 hours. Just enough time before the rescheduled will reading. As I walked out of the clinic into the crisp Philadelphia air, something shifted inside me. For the first time I wasn't just reacting to Gregory's game. I was making my own moves. If Ryan was my father, then no amount of scheming from Gregory would change the facts. I wasn't the outsider. I was a Blackwell by blood, by name, by legacy. And when the results came back, whichever way they landed, I would finally know who I truly was. The results arrived in an encrypted email, 70 hours after the swabs had touched our cheeks. I opened the file alone in my apartment, hands trembling, heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape before the truth hit me. It didn't take long to find the line I needed. Probability of paternity, 99.99998%. Ryan Blackwell wasn't just my uncle. He was my father. I stared at the screen, the numbers burning themselves into my brain. A strange cocktail of emotions surged through me: relief, grief, clarity, rage. Every cold glance from Gregory, every time he'd made me feel like I didn't belong. It all made sense now. He knew. Or at least he'd suspected for a long time. Long enough to build a strategy. Long enough to get his lawyer involved. Long enough to try and erase me. Called Ryan. When he answered, his voice cracked just slightly. I had a feeling, he said. But seeing it confirmed. Ava, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied. I just wanted you to know. We agreed to meet before the will reading to discuss next steps. But that night the game changed again. Ryan called, voice low and tight. I just spoke to someone I trust. An old family friend who used to work with our parents. She told me something shocking. What? He paused. Gregory. He's not biologically a Blackwell. The world spun. Wait, what? He was adopted, Ryan said. Our parents couldn't conceive for years. They adopted him as a baby. Then later, unexpectedly, my mother got pregnant with me. They never told Gregory. Or anyone. They wanted him to feel like part of the family. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to breathe. And Eleanor? I asked. She knew, he said quietly. She was the one who arranged everything. She even mentioned it to her attorney years ago, just in case. I sat down hard, the weight of it crashing over me like a wave. Gregory had spent his life obsessed with bloodline, with legacy, with status. And in trying to erase me for not being real, he'd opened the door to the very truth that would destroy him. He was the outsider, not me. By morning, I wasn't just fighting for my share of the will. I was carrying the one truth that could dismantle Gregory's entire grip on the Blackwell legacy. He had built his power on a lie. And now I held the proof. The Blackwell estate looked like a museum the morning of the will reading, grand, polished, and cold. Just like the family. I arrived early with Ryan. We said little, but the weight of what we carried sat heavy between us. DNA results, adoption records, and Eleanor's last line of defense. A sealed envelope Bernard Walsh had been instructed to deliver if needed. Inside, Gregory sat at the end of the long mahogany table like a king returning to his throne. His posture was relaxed, confident, even smug. My two half-brothers flanked him, visibly uncomfortable, but clearly loyal. I took a seat directly across from him. Harrison Mills cleared his throat at the head of the table. Before we proceed, I must raise a concern brought forth regarding succession eligibility within the Blackwell family trust. Gregory leaned forward, all too eager. Indeed. As you may have heard, he said smoothly, recent developments have called into question Ava's status as my biological daughter, and thus her eligibility under the trust's bloodline clause. Murmurs rippled across the room. I remained still. Harrison opened a folder Gregory slid toward him. We have DNA evidence confirming that Ava is not genetically related to Gregory Blackwell. I inhaled deeply. May I ask how that test was conducted? I said calmly. Gregory didn't flinch. Simple. You left a water glass at dinner. I had it tested. I turned to Harrison. That's unauthorized DNA collection. Illegal in this state. He waved it off. The method is irrelevant. The result is what matters. I let the silence stretch. Then perhaps, I said, sliding a folder across the table, you should look at this. Gregory's smirk twitched. Harrison opened it and paled. It was our test. The real one. Conducted legally and irrefutable. Ava Blackwell, I said clearly, is the biological daughter of Ryan Blackwell, a direct blood descendant of Eleanor Blackwell. Gasps filled the room. Gregory's face twisted in fury. That changes nothing. The trust favors children of Douglas Blackwell, me. No, Ryan said, standing slowly. The trust specifies direct descendants of Harold Blackwell, Eleanor's father. Which Gregory is not. Harrison blinked. What are you talking about? Gregory stood, eyes wide. He's lying. Ryan placed another folder on the table. Adoption papers. DNA results. Gregory is not a biological Blackwell. The room fell into stunned silence. Before Gregory could speak, the doors opened, and in walked Bernard Walsh. I apologize for being late, he said, leaning on a cane, but I believe my presence is timely. Gregory looked like he'd seen a ghost. Bernard placed a sealed envelope on the table. Eleanor instructed me to read this only if disputes over lineage arose. He opened it slowly, then began. To my family. If this letter is being read, then the secret I have protected is now known. As Bernard read, Gregory's legacy unraveled word by word. And I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply sat still and watched him drown in the truth he tried to weaponize against me. By your own insistence on bloodline purity, Bernard read, You have disqualified yourself from the very legacy you fought to control. His voice was calm, unwavering. Gregory's face was no longer smug. It was pale, drawn, almost unrecognizable. His hands trembled, fists clenched on the polished wood of the table. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Bernard set the letter down and looked around the room with the poise of a man who had seen empires rise and fall across decades of private estates and contested wills. In accordance with Eleanor Blackwell's explicit instructions, he said, and in light of the DNA evidence confirming both Gregory Blackwell's adoption and Ava Blackwell's parentage, he paused for effect. And it landed like thunder. All trust assets requiring direct Blackwell bloodline shall pass to Ryan Blackwell and his biological daughter Ava. The air seemed to vanish from the room. The Blackwell fortune, 3 generations of inheritance, property, investments, and stock portfolios, was now in our hands. Gregory lunged from his chair. You promised, he barked across the table. You said only blood relatives deserve the Blackwell fortune. I turned to him slowly, voice low but steady. No, I said. You said that. I merely asked if you'd keep your word. His mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time in my life, Gregory Blackwell had nothing left to say. He turned to Harrison, eyes pleading. Do something, he whispered. But Harrison was already backing away, distancing himself from a client whose lies had just detonated in public. The documents are valid, he said quickly. The chain of evidence is intact. I advised compliance. It was over. No more veiled threats. No more manipulation. No more control. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded envelope. I walked around the table and laid it gently in front of Gregory. What's this? He hissed. A courtesy, I replied. It's a formal offer. You can walk away quietly with a severance Eleanor approved years ago. Assuming you didn't make things worse. His eyes scanned the paper. Then he tore it in half. You think this is over? He growled. No, I said softly. I think this is your beginning. Of being forgotten. He stood there, chest heaving, surrounded by a family who no longer looked at him with fear or reverence, only pity. Then he turned and stormed out of the room. Harrison followed, his career likely crumbling behind him. The only sound left was the soft shuffle of papers as Bernard closed the folder and said, We'll proceed now with the remainder of Eleanor's personal bequests. But for me, the real inheritance had already arrived. Not the money, not the properties, but the moment I rewrote my place in this family, not with anger but with absolute clarity. The house emptied slowly after the reading. Relatives whispered in corners. Some avoided my gaze. Others offered awkward smiles, unsure of which version of me they should now acknowledge, the granddaughter erased or the heir restored. But it was Thomas, my older half-brother, who approached first. I didn't know, he said quietly, his voice tight. None of us did. I nodded. He hesitated. Dad. Gregory, he wasn't always like this. Or maybe he was and we just didn't see it. Behind him, William stood stiff, then stepped forward. You're still our sister. Nothing's changed. Everything had changed. But I appreciated the gesture. Ryan and I stayed behind. We wandered into Eleanor's old study, now eerily still. Her chair faced the window like it always had, the afternoon sun spilling across the worn rug. I sat where she once sat, fingers grazing the same desk drawer she used to hide little chocolates in when I was a child. She knew, I whispered. Ryan nodded. She always knew. She protected me. Even when she couldn't say it out loud. He leaned against the bookcase. She gave you something far greater than money. What? A name no one can take away from you. Not anymore. We sat for hours, sharing stories we'd never gotten to share. I asked him about his childhood. He asked me about mine. And together we started weaving something new, not to replace what was lost but to grow from it. Later that week, I stood before the family estate one last time. It didn't feel like home anymore. Maybe it never had. I wouldn't be living there. Instead, I donated part of Eleanor's personal library to a local women's college. The rest, I moved to a historical foundation I was starting under her name, dedicated to preserving untold family histories. The kind that get hidden, twisted, or erased. Stories like mine. The media called it a scandal, a downfall, a Shakespearean twist. But they missed the point. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming truth and rewriting the legacy Eleanor intended all along. Gregory disappeared from public life. Word was he left the country. Harrison's firm issued a statement distancing itself from the fiasco. The rest of the family fell quiet. But Ryan and I, we met every Sunday now for tea. Just like Eleanor and I used to. It wasn't perfect. There was grief, regret, years we'd never get back. But it was real. And in a family built on appearances, that was the most radical inheritance of all. One day, I'll sit with my own daughter and tell her this story. Not as a warning, but as a reminder. That blood doesn't make you family. But truth? Truth makes you free. If this story stirred something in you, anger, hope, justice, let us know in the comments below. We read every word you write. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true-life twists that prove reality is stranger than fiction. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay curious, stay strong, and never let anyone write your ending for you.